Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second episode of the webinar series. Let me just give a quick introduction about myself. I am Sakshi Malhotra, and I teach psychology to the senior classes in a school. And I've been working in the area of adolescent mental health for about 8 years. Today in this series, we're going to talk about unwinding toxic relationships. And when I talk about relationships here, I mean any kind of a relationship, whether it is between two romantic partners, whether it's with friends, with parents, with any significant other person in our life, right? Now, as we interact with them and as we develop our experiences with these people around us who are so significant in our lives, we learn a lot of things from them, right? We learn a lot of things as a part of the journey of being in that relationship with those people. But there are a lot of things which nobody explicitly teaches us. And one of them is how to love, feelings of love, gratitude, respect. Nobody explicitly talks about that, this is a definition of healthy love and this is what unhealthy love is. And exactly why we are here today. So, we will begin by talking about the dynamics of a toxic relationship. How can we identify when we are in one or when we become one for someone else? Right? To begin with, let's first talk about what is a toxic relationship, right? Now, when I was doing my research for this particular topic, I read up a lot, a lot of journals, and I read up a lot of researches. And one thing which came across as a very pertinent, and a very common, explanation to toxic relationships is that it is a behavior of the toxic partner which is emotionally and physically damaging to the other person. Right? Now, again, this other partner could be your boyfriend, your girlfriend, it could be your husband, wife, your parents, your children, or it could be your closest friends, somebody who you've grown up with. It could be anyone. And a toxic relationship is primarily based on four very important features. First one of them is insecurity. Then we have self-centeredness, dominance, and control. So these particular four characteristics, if they are present in any kind of a relationship, that is a good enough red flag. It's a good enough red sign for you to, start thinking about it, right? So, according to me, this is my version of a toxic relationship, and I'm going to go ahead with this. Further. So, when two individuals are in a toxic relationship, we usually look at the behavior of the toxic partner. That, how do we identify this person? When do we know that the other person has become toxic for us? But a lot of times we often neglect the person who is at the receiving end of this toxicity, which is the person who is the recipient of the toxic behavior. So, here we are going to talk about both of these things. First, we are going to talk about what makes a relationship toxic, and then we are going to talk about from a recipient point of view, that if I am in a toxic relationship, then why do I continue to remain in that kind of a relationship? Right? So, let's begin. So, I'm going to talk about four to five red flags, or as I say, signs that you might be in a toxic relationship. And the first and the very most important point here is unequal status. So when I talk about toxic relationships, a relationship can definitely turn into a toxic one if there is an unequal status between both the members who are a part of the relationship. I've always felt that it takes two individual separate identities to come together and coexist, and that is what forms a relationship. Now, if these two individual identities do not feel equal, do not feel respected, or they feel maybe that one person has become completely dominant in the other over the other person, where this other person has just become like a shadow of this, you know, person, then I can say that it is a toxic relationship. So there's a disparity, there is a triggering mechanism of dominance and subjection. So it might also happen that in this kind of an unequal relationship, one person might put in all heart and soul into the relationship. The emotional investment of this particular person is going to be very, very high. And the other person might not just be, invested in the relationship at all. And so when this one person becomes really dominant and the other one is subjected to that dominance, what happens is that the person who is dominant in this relationship, they create such an environment in a relationship where even your happiness depends on whether this toxic person is happy or not. So if your emotions, if your happiness, if your level of mental well-being is dependent on whether the other person is happy or not, otherwise, the dominant person might create situations which might make you also unhappy just because this person is also unhappy. So that is something that can, be the first red flag, right? And the second feature of a toxic relationship, as I mentioned earlier, is insecurity. Now, when I talk about insecurity, you must have heard these stories in school how people become a bully. So a person was maybe bullied earlier in life, and then when they became older, they became bullies themselves. Or maybe, a person who was insecure of their looks or their intelligence, or, any inadequacy or inability which they feel they had. And to cover up for that inadequacy, they end up, becoming much more aggressive, and maybe, start bullying other people around just because it has happened to them as well. So any kind of an insecurity, any kind of an inadequacy creates this entire loop where the person tries to overcompensate for the loss, right? And that in itself can be a sign of a toxic relationship, where the toxic partner is, portraying their aggression in the form of bullying, on the form of emotional abuse, which is deeply rooted in their own insecurities about the particular relationship. And the third sign that I'm going to talk about is not something that you're not familiar with: physical violence, right? When I talk about physical violence is one thing which is the most outwardly visible part of being in a toxic relationship. And when we talk about physical violence, of late there's been a lot of talk, if I talk about the Bollywood movies, there's been a lot of talk about the movie Kabir Singh. And if you remember, the director of the movie, Sandeep Reddy, he ended up saying that, if you don't have the liberty of slapping each other, then I don't see anything there. Now, in this particular statement, if I do not if I do not feel that I have the liberty to slap my partner, then there is no love. Aisa kaisa pyar? Now, this whole statement is automatically very, very problematic because it directly justifies and normalizes any kind of abusive behavior towards the other person in a relationship. And physical violence is not something that exists only in between a husband and a wife, or between a boyfriend and a girlfriend. It can exist even between friends. It can exist in severe forms between a parent-child relationship as well. So that definitely is a red flag. So that's a sign of a toxic relationship. The fourth point is, and something which is very often experienced by a lot of people when they are friends with the person for a very long time. A lot of times we fall prey to emotional abuse and gaslighting, right? Now, what is gaslighting? Um, in gaslighting, the toxic partner blatantly denies that they completely deny the fact that they are manipulative or they have manipulated the situation, and they even ignore the evidences once you confront them. So let's say you call up your friend and you say that, the way you behaved the other day is not something that I really appreciate. And then this person ends up saying that, no, I did not do anything. I think you were overreacting. Right? So instead of the toxic person, somehow everything that has been wrong in this relationship becomes your fault. That you are oversensitive, you are overreacting. Right? So the level of emotional manipulation and abuse is so high that even we ourselves are blamed to, be too sensitive or maybe too crazy, whatever the case might be. And they make you believe that the problem is not the abusive relationship itself, it's actually your reaction to that abuse. And that is what I call gaslighting. So, gaslighting is when a person might manipulate you, might try and make you cut off from other people in your life. Let's say there's a friend of yours who has a severe problem with you hanging out with other group of your friends, and they have this insecurity, and they keep giving you signs for it, that they might not pick up your calls, they might give they might pass remarks on you every time you talk about the other friend group. And every time you say that, I don't really appreciate you doing this, they end up justifying themselves by saying that, no, I did not mean it. Right? I didn't even say in that direction. You are being oversensitive and you are being crazy in that particular relationship. So, gaslighting again is a very important aspect of a toxic relationship. So, of course, there are many other red flags, but for now, let's just consider these four, which is unequal status, insecurity, physical violence, and gaslighting and emotional abuse. Right? So, now let's move on to why do people continue to stay in these toxic relationships? Now, we've spoken about what is a toxic relationship, we've spoken about the behavior of the toxic partner, and now we are going to talk about the person who is the recipient of this toxic relationship. Now, there are a lot of times where you might have already realized these signs, in a relationship, but you probably did not do anything about it, or you even still you're still in one and you haven't done anything about it. So why do people continue to stay in toxic relationships? The very first reason could be low self-esteem. So if a person feels that there's this quote in this film, Perks of Being a Wallflower. And there is this quote which immediately comes to my mind. It says that we accept the love we think we deserve. Now, if I feel that I deserve to be in this kind of an abusive relationship, maybe because it is my fault, I did not give this person time, I did not understand the other person's intention. So here, your own self-esteem, if it is at risk, a lot of times we cling on to that relationship because we probably feel that we don't have any other identity other than being in this relationship. So when we talk about low self-esteem, a lot of times, especially if I talk about a parent-child relationship, and if let's say the child feels that the parent's behavior is toxic for the child's mental health, in this case, of course, because we're talking about parenthood, and things become very, very difficult because of patriarchy, because of the sense of authority that they have over you. So a lot of times we tend to ignore these signs of toxicity in that relationship, and we continue because somewhere we feel that we deserve that treatment in one way or the other. Right? So low self-esteem definitely is one. The second reason why people continue to stay in toxic relationships is because of the initial time and investment that you have done in a relationship. Now, let's say you've been friends with this person ever since you were a kid, and you've literally grown up together. So it's not that easy to just let people go. So it might happen that you might have realized the signs of this toxicity in that relationship, but just because of the previous commitment and time and effort that you have given to this relationship, कि 10 साल की दोस्ती है, अब क्या तोड़नी, या ये चीज़ तो होती रहती है. वी कीप नॉर्मलाइजिंग थिंग्स एंड वी ऑलवेज हैव दिस होप कि सब ठीक हो जाएगा, कोई बात नहीं, लेट्स परस्यू इट, लेट्स कंटिन्यू टू डील विद इट, बिकॉज अल्टीमेटली वी एक्सपेक्ट सब ठीक हो जाएगा. एंड third is we have this fear of abandonment. A lot of us continue to be in severely toxic relationships because we feel that we have nowhere else to go. If you remember in the movie Dil Dhadakne Do, the character of the mother, which is played by Shifali, she goes through similar emotions towards the end of the film. If you remember, Ranveer Singh plays her son, and he, in a fit of anger, ends up saying, the reason why you are still, in this relationship with your husband, despite knowing that he's very flamboyant and he keeps on flirting around with other women, is because you have nowhere else to go. And that is something that stuck with her. And towards the end, she even confronts her husband, saying that, he's completely right, that I did not have anywhere else to go. And I always had this constant fear कि तुम मुझे कब छोड़ दोगे. So that fear of abandonment, the fear of being alone, our natural need to belong to somebody might be so high in some people that we still continue to persist, assuming and hoping कि सब ठीक हो जाएगा. Right? So that of course could be one of the reasons. So now that we've understood this entire framework of what is a toxic relationship and why do people continue with it, let's now talk about how we can manage this kind of a toxic relationship. Now, just because the relationship is toxic, it's not necessary that you need to completely cut off yourself from this source of toxicity. Sometimes it's not even feasible to do that. So I'm not going to talk about eliminate. I'm going to talk about manage and then, probably eliminate if things don't work out. So the first thing to change any kind of a toxic relationship is to accept the fact that you are in one. Right? Stop denying the fact. Stop normalizing or justifying by saying, तो क्या हुआ, तो एक गाली तो दी थी, तो क्या हुआ, थोड़ा सा मार ही तो दिया, या थोड़ा सा हाथ तो लगा दिया. Right? It's not okay. It's not okay. People live in this denial even when friends or family members already, sometimes they tell you the danger signs. A lot of times, your friends or your family members, they tell you that, listen, I don't think you should be with this person anymore. And sometimes they are right, because what we might not be able to see from a one-on-one perspective, a third person's perspective can definitely help us to evolve in that relationship. And the second important step to manage a toxic relationship is to understand that toxic people survive in toxic systems. Right? So once you understand that how these people derive their power from the system, you will be prepared to make a critical difference. Now, if I talk about again, a parent and a child relationship, by virtue of being a parent, there's a lot of authority in that position. And with that authority, there can be, like I said, unequal status. There can be dominance. And that dominance might make you feel suffocated or feel that this relationship is entirely toxic. So where are they deriving their source of power from? By virtue of being a parent. So parenthood on itself is a system. Is a system which might create a toxic person. So we need to understand that if we remove the system away from this toxic person, then is this person toxic? You need to question on that. And if the answer is yes, then of course you need to manage that. right? So here another important thing which I need to mention is it's called sunk cost fallacy. Now, what is the sunk cost fallacy? It's the habit of our mind, which focuses on what you've invested in a relationship, all the time, money, effort, and it keeps you in place so that you don't lose that initial investment. So, sunk cost fallacy basically means that when you feel that you have sunk deep into this relationship because you've invested so much, like I said, 10 साल पुरानी दोस्ती है, अब क्या दोस्ती तोड़नी, या वो तो पेरेंट है, या वो तो हस्बैंड है, या वो तो गर्लफ्रेंड है, वो तो ऐसे बिहेव करेगी ही. Just because you spend so much of time, money, effort, emotion in that relationship does not mean that things cannot be managed or things cannot be changed, right? And the word fallacy says it all. The very reason why we call it a fallacy is because it's not true. It's not true that anything that you invest in emotionally for a long period of time is going to contribute to your emotional well-being. Sometimes it might not. So that is something that we need to, that attitude needs to be changed, that attitude needs to be monitored, right? The fourth and the very important thing is setting limits and being assertive. Now, when you feel that you are in a toxic relationship and you want to communicate it to the other person, you have to be assertive about it and you have to set your own limits. How much is too much for you? That is for you to decide. Right? So here I would definitely want to include the example of the movie Thappad. If you've seen the film or if you've seen even the trailer of the film, the conviction and the assertiveness with which Tapsi ends up saying just a slap, but nahi maar sakta. So this nahi maar sakta is your limit. That is your level of assertiveness. So you have to decide how much is too much, right? So if you're talking about a toxic person in your life from the point of investment, now if you set your limit, and of course this person has a habit of dominating, being the dominant person in the relationship, they are not going to take it very very easily. Suddenly that you've become so assertive and you've set limits for yourself, they're not going to take it lightly, right? So the chances are that the toxic person might actually redouble their efforts trying to grab their initial dominance in that relationship, and to keep the dynamics going, they might even redouble their efforts in manipulating you, gaslighting, in one way or the other, spreading rumors about you just to gain an upper hand. And this especially is true if you are in a relationship with a narcissist. A narcissist is somebody who is completely the driving force of a relationship, where he or she feels that they are the center of that relationship and everything that happens in the relationship should be for them, should be around them, and they are the main focal point of that relationship, right? Another thing to understand is to not normalize abusive behavior. Emotional abuse of any form, physical abuse of any form is not normal. Let go of the fantasy and stop romanticizing abuse. This is very important, especially if you've been in a very long-term relationship with anybody, somebody who you've grown up with. Sometimes people might use words as weapons, and these weapons can be used to manipulate you, to gaslight you, and ultimately they end up saying that these are only words. मैंने बोला है, मारा थोड़ी है, मैंने सिर्फ बोला है कि मैं मार दूंगी या मैं कर दूंगी, किया मैंने, right? So these words are weapon enough for you to understand that yes, this is something that you will not take, and this is something that you are not going to accept in a relationship. So that of course is important. And finally, if you still feel that this relationship has become too toxic for you, so much so that it has overpowered your own mental health, and probably you feel that it's time to take a step back from this relationship. You need to consider separating yourself from this source of toxicity, right? Now, of course, if you are in a romantic relationship, it might mean breaking up, or if you feel it's a parent child relationship, of course, you cannot break off from your parents or you cannot break off from your child, but a certain sense of distance can be maintained from this source of toxicity. Or if it's even between co-workers in an office, you can emotionally learn and manage to distance yourself from these people, so that the impact of that dominance, of that toxicity, of that narcissism probably reduces, a little bit. So, what you need to understand is that you need to look within and understand that how you felt when you were in this relationship. Was it making you happy? When you were in this toxic relationship. When you start evaluating and asking these questions, you will realize a lot of relationships around us require this revisiting. And as you begin to abandon toxic people, healthier ones will inevitably take their place. So it's not that you're going to be alone. It's just that when you make healthier choices, and by healthier choices, I mean choices for your own mental health, choices for yourself. So you need to stop asking, do they like me? And start asking, do I like them? There's a huge difference when we do that, right? Be on the lookout for the vultures. When I say vultures, these are the toxic people who are looking for or feeding off people who are less assertive, and probably who feel that they deserve to be a part of this kind of a relationship, right? So the right decision might not always lead you to immediate happiness, and more often than not, it is the most difficult decision to take, but definitely a necessary one to take, right? Just imagine a very closed, tight glass jar. If I have to open this glass jar, and let's say that this particular glass jar represents a toxic relationship, will this glass jar open that easily? No. I might have to, bang it against the bed, or I might have to put it into hot water to open this, airtight glass jar. But once I do, you're free, right? It's liberating, it's freeing from years of emotional abuse, from years of mental backlog, from physical abuse, from gaslighting, all of that we just discussed, right? So in certain cases where you feel this source of toxicity cannot be managed and you need to distance yourself, just imagine how would you feel, or how your life would be without this particular toxicity in your life. And if that thought makes you happy, then of course you know what to do, right? And if you feel that this particular relationship can be mended and it can be managed through open, healthy communication, then that's your call. So either you can remain in this airtight jar container, or you can open it and see where it takes you from there.